This original WSRE presentation is made possible by viewers like you. Thank you.
He was a close confidant of Alabama coach Paul Bear Bryant. Dr. Gaylon McCollough on this edition of Conversations. Welcome to Conversations. I'm Jeff Weeks. Thank you so very much for joining us. If you like football, and particularly if you like Alabama football, make sure you stay tuned. We've got a great program for you. Dr. Gaylon McCollough is the author, of The Long Shadow of Coach Paul Bear Bryant. Welcome to our program.
Thanks, Jeff. Delighted to be here.
Tell me your involvement with Alabama, because you were a player to begin with. What got you to the University of Alabama? How'd you get there?
Well, Coach Bryant did. I actually had committed to go to Georgia Tech, and I was going to be an architect. And Coach Bryant came along and promised me a national championship ring if I came to Alabama. And so I decided that I would go to Alabama. I'd played on a high school championship team, so I'd had a taste of championships. And that's really why I went to Alabama, was because of him.
And what year was that?
That was 1961.
Okay. And who were some of the players you were there with?
Well, probably the only one that people would really remember would be Joe Namath. Namath and I were contemporaries. We went there as freshmen together, and we completed our eligibility together.
Okay.
Ray Perkins was also, though, on that same team, and Jackie Sherrill was on that team as well.
So not a bad bunch of ball players, I would say.
Well, Namath was the only star we had. The rest of us were what I call blue-collar players. Okay. We were role players, but sometimes Coach Bryant made us think that we could play better than we thought we could, and so he had the ability to get the very best out of everybody.
I'll come back to that in just a second, but once you get out of the University of Alabama, you go on to pursue a medical career. So take me up from that to where you are now.
Well, I was drafted by the Cowboys and had a chance to play professional football, and went to Coach Bryant, as I talk about in the book, and asked his opinion. And he asked me, could I live without football? And I said, I think I can. And he said, if you can live without football, go get your medical degree, and it'll be there for life. And for a while, I wondered if I'd made the right mistake when I was in a little 12-by-12 apartment on Sunday afternoons, and all my buddies were out there playing pro football and making a lot of money, and I was struggling just to get through or to get by in medical school.
Okay.
And then I went on to medical school, and from there, decided that I wanted to be a facial plastic surgeon. So I pursued that and went to take a fellowship in facial plastic surgery in Beverly Hills, California, and then Boston, and then New Orleans, and went back to UAB and was on the faculty there and opened up my own clinic after that.
Okay, so you're currently practicing medicine now, but also doing some writing on the side. So you wrote this, The Long Shadow of Coach Paul Bear Bryant. Give us kind of a synopsis of what the book is about.
Well, it had been 22 years since Coach Bryant had passed away. And the legend was growing, of course, and a lot of the information that was out there was not totally correct. Some people had embellished certain stories and had not told the truth in some situations. So I really felt like that the truth needed to be written. And there are a lot of books out there about Coach Bryant, but as I researched them, I think this is the only book that's ever been written by someone who actually knew the man. Mm-hmm. The other books are written by people who have interviewed individuals who knew him or researched him and maybe ghost written. But I wrote every word of this, and there's a lot of things in there that have never been divulged or revealed about Coach Bryant. There are good things, but a part of the man that has never really been disclosed until this book came out.
What are some of those things?
Well, one of the things is that he was a much sicker man in the last few years of his life than anyone knew. I was one of his physicians and part of the medical team, and we carried a cardiac defibrillator with us virtually everywhere we went because he had severe heart disease, and he had had a minor stroke, and we were able to keep that from the press as well. And he was on blood thinners and a lot of other medications. And his greatest fear during this period of time was he would drop dead on the sidelines and create a scene. And he did not want to do that.
So you really had to stay on top of it from a medical standpoint. You tell a story in the book about, I guess he was at your house and he left and was complaining and he thought it was arthritis.
Yes.
Take me through that.
Well, the day before he died, or the day before he went into the hospital and died that evening, he was at our house and we were talking about some things and about the future of Alabama. He was concerned about the University of Alabama after he had decided to retire, and he said, quote, "Gaylon, Alabama's going to be in for some bad times," and he said, "Our people aren't going to understand why." And he asked me to be involved and during the transition and to try to pass some of his statements along, because he really thought that he did not have long to live. Mm-hmm. He was very much aware of his health conditions. And as he got ready to leave the house that afternoon, he reached over and rubbed his shoulder and he said, "This arthritis is driving me crazy." He said, "I bet I take 20 aspirin tablets a day just to be able to go to practice and do what I have to do." And I missed it. I think he was having angina that afternoon, and I was so wrapped up in the other things that we were talking about. My wife was the one that actually picked it up. After he left, she said, "Coach looks bad today." And I said, "Honey, he looks like I've been seeing him for the last 2 years." She said, "No, there's something different." Well, there was something different. He had his heart attack within 24 hours and then passed away 12 hours after that.
And he had only been retired how long? Short period.
A very short period of time. As a matter of fact, on the day that we announced his retirement and that Ray Perkins was hired, a reporter asked him that day, "Coach, what do you think you're going to do after you step down?" And he said, "I'll probably be dead in 30 days. He died exactly 30 days from that statement.
Go back to something you said a minute ago. He said the University of Alabama was going to be in for some tough times.
Yes.
What was he talking about?
Well, Coach Bryant was a student of history, and he had gone back and researched great programs where icons had been there for a number of years. And he had seen what happened to those programs after that great coach or that legend stepped away. And so he knew that Alabama was going to be in for some bad times. And as I talk about in the book, he admitted, he said, "I've done a poor job the last 2 or 3 years coaching." He said, "I haven't been in good enough health to do the job I needed to do. I haven't been able to recruit the players." And he said, "We don't have the kind of players on our team right now that we're accustomed to having." And he said, "Whoever comes in here is going to have a tough time." And his words are, quote, "Y'all going to have to get somebody in here that's young enough and tough enough to weather the storm because bad times are ahead."
You were a part of the committee, part of the folks whose responsibility it was to hire that new coach. Take me through that scenario.
Well, he asked me if I would do that the day that he told me that he was going to retire, and I think he probably shared that with me before he'd even talked to his family about it. I saw him that day, and he'd been up all night. He was at the television station to tape his show, and he asked me if I could stay around, and we went to lunch, and he told me about the fact that he had to retire. He said, "Because I'm just not doing a good job." So he asked me if I would be on the selection committee, and I told him I'd be honored to do anything that I could. And so sure enough, Dr. Thomas did ask me to be on the committee, and my job was I was the liaison between the University of Alabama and the potential candidates. That way, if a candidate was asked, he could say nobody from the university has contacted me.
Right.
So it was my job to contact the potential candidates and ask them if they were interested. And of course, everybody was. And then I set the interviews up, and the interviews were held in my office in Birmingham at the time. So we went through the selection process, and it was a very, very interesting ordeal, I guess you would say. And the individual we thought going in who was going to emerge as the head coach was not the one that emerged as the head coach, and there were good reasons for that.
Who did you think was going to emerge?
Gene Stallings. It had been narrowed down to Howard Schnellenberger, who had done a very outstanding job at the University of Miami, to Gene Stallings, who was really pretty much a protege of Coach Bryant. He walked like him, talked like him, acted like him, and we thought it'd be a natural transition. And then Ray Perkins. And going into it, we all thought that Stallings was going to emerge, but during the interview process, it was clear that Ray Perkins was the only one that had committed to doing whatever it took. Gene was a little bit wishy-washy about it and did not convince the committee that if offered the job, he would take it at the time.
And he was with the Cowboys at the time.
He was with the Cowboys, and one of his statements, as I talk about in the book, is that Coach Landry had told him when he retired he was going to recommend him, Stallings, to be the next coach at the Cowboys. And he had a ranch in Texas, and he was very open about it. He said, "I'm very happy there. I think I've got a great career with the Cowboys, and Coach Landry's indicated that I might be the next coach, so I'm not sure that I can make that commitment." And the timing was really important because we were already into recruiting season, and we were getting hammered in the recruiting wars at that time. And so we had a press conference set up for the following Tuesday. All these interviews were held on Sunday. And so my question, the only question that I asked the candidates, if you were offered the job today, would you be willing to hold a press conference on Tuesday with Coach Bryant and announce that you're the next head coach? Howard Schnellenberger said, no. He said, I don't think I can. He said, I think I'm going to win the national championship next year in Miami. And he did. Mm-hmm. And Gene Stalin said, no, I don't think I can. That's too quick for me. I can't move that quickly. And when I asked Ray Perkins the question, he looked me in the eye. And you got to know Ray Perkins, those steel blue-eyed. He said, yep. And so the word yep is the reason that Ray Perkins was hired at Alabama.
And, of course, he was with the New York Giants at the time.
He was a head coach, and none of us thought that he would leave the Giants because he had brought the Giants to the playoffs for the first time in about a dozen years. So Perkins had it going in New York.
And, of course, Gene Stallings did coach the Crimson Tide in later years.
Later on, he came back around and coached it and did an outstanding job, won the national championship, as you know.
Right. Let's focus in on Coach Paul Bear Bryant. He was a legend in college football and more than a legend in the state of Alabama. What was it about that guy that made him such a great coach?
Well, he was bigger than life. I've been around. I was with him many times, and we'd go into a room full of politicians and entertainers and movie stars. And when he walked in the room, the atmosphere of the room changed. Even people of a high status had tremendous respect for him. He had a presence about him that was a very commanding type presence. But what made him successful is that he outworked most of his adversaries. His mind never rested. He was always looking for the competitive edge. He always had not only a plan, but he had a backup plan, then he had a backup plan behind that. There's a story that I tell in the book about 3 legal pads. Yeah. And I went to visit him one night before a ball game, and he had a desk put in the middle of his suite. And there were 3 legal pads on the desk, and we were chit-chatting around a little bit, and I finally said, Coach, I can't stand it. I got to ask you the question. Why 3 legal pads? He said, he mumbled a little bit, and he said, I ain't ever told anybody this before, but he said, the first one's what I'm going to say if we lose. The second one's what I'm going to say if we win, and the third one's what I'm going to say if we get tied. So he had planned every single thing. One of his statements that he told of players all the time is expect the unexpected. He said, if you go out there at the beginning of the ball game and you look up on the scoreboard 2 minutes into the game and you're down by 21 points, have a plan. Know what you're going to do. Know how you're going to react to that and act accordingly. And he said, conversely, if you go out there and you're ahead by 21, know what you're going to do. So his work ethic was incredible, and then he had the ability to get people to want to follow him. You wanted to please him. There was something about the man that you just wanted any kind of recognition, a nod, a smile, or attaboy, or a way to go, or anything like that. And that was the coaches as well as the players. And, of course, we talked earlier about the story of the anthill and how he got his idea of conducting practice from watching an anthill while he was in the Navy and he was on guard duty and he was standing there and he watched these ants, and he concluded that no ant ever stood around and watched another ant do anything. They were all busy. And so in those days, you could hire as many coaches as you wanted to hire, and you could sign as many players as you could afford to feed. And so when you went to the practice field, we had a 30 or 40 acre practice field there. You might have 8 or 10 different groups going through the exact same exercises. And that's why he had his tower, because he could stand up on that tower and he could watch all the different groups, and everybody was working. Nobody was ever standing around watching anybody do anything. So the man was just an icon of efficiency as well as motivation.
I'd heard somewhere on the whole tower issue, he would stand up there and you would think he wouldn't know maybe what was going on with this group or that group, but he was in tune to all of it. Is that true?
He could see it all. And the coaches were more afraid of him than the players were. You'd watch them after every play, after every little deal, they're always cutting their eyes up to the tower, seeing if he was watching. And the sound you never wanted to hear was the clang of that chain during a drill, because that meant he was coming down on the field, and you wanted him to stay up on that tower, because when he came down, there was a reason that he came down, and somebody was in deep trouble. And I've been in the middle of some of those things. I talk about a lot of that in the book, about some of the instances when he did come down from the tower and the lessons that he taught right on the spot.
Give me the highlights of some of the lessons that you took away from being around him personally, and doing it at two levels. Number one as a player, and then number two once you sort of became a confidant.
Okay. I'll tell you two as a player, and these are the two that really stuck with me, and I talked about them in the book. One was, set the stage a little bit. Alabama had won the national championship in '61. In '62, I was a sophomore. We were ranked number one going into the ninth game of the year, and we went to play Georgia Tech in Atlanta. Georgia Tech was in the SEC at that time. It was a terrible day, raining, and Namath had gotten his ribs injured early in the ball game. We were behind 6-0 in the fourth quarter, 7-0 in the fourth quarter. We scored with about 3 minutes to go in the game and decided to go for two and didn't make it. And then we recovered a fumble, got the ball, went down, were ready to kick the winning field goal, and went to the sidelines, tried one more play, pass was intercepted. So we lost the ball game. And we were in the dressing room, and not only did we lose the game, we knew we'd lost the national championship. And that was the ring I'd been promised. And I was looking forward to that ring along with everybody else there. So we went to the dressing room, and everybody had their hands in their face and, tears, and we were really dejected. And Coach Bryant came in, and we always said the Lord's Prayer after the ball game. But that day he said, get on your knees, and he led us in prayer. And it was a very short prayer. He said, Dear God, please let these young men forgive me. For if I'd stayed at home today, they'd have won the ball game. Well, all of a sudden, the feeling of despair went to one of, what did he just say? And then he got up, and he started talking to us, and he said, for the first time I ever heard it, he said, you didn't get beat out there today. You didn't get beat out there today. Time just ran out on you. He said, now you got a choice. If you pick up where you left off here in the fourth quarter today, and you go forward with that, we'll be okay. He said, we play Auburn in Birmingham next week. If you go out there and you feel sorry for yourself, you'll get beat. But if you pick up where you left off in the fourth quarter here today, you'll be okay. Well, we did, and it was an uplifting type of event, and we won 34-0 the following week. And then we went to the Orange Bowl, and we played Oklahoma, who had replaced us as the number one team, and we beat Oklahoma. So he took a bad situation and made it into a very positive situation, something to build upon. The man was a master psychologist. He knew how to do that. One other story I'll tell you about that also is in the book was we played in the Orange Bowl my senior year. We won the national championship. In those days, the voting was determined before the bowl games. So we went there as the national champion. We were playing Texas. We got behind in the game. Late in the fourth quarter, Namath comes off the bench. He'd been hurt. His knees were bad. We come in and we go down to, we get on the 6-inch line, and we're down by 5. Less than a minute to go in the game. So if we score the touchdown, we win the ball game. And we just all assumed we were going to win it. We always did. Well, we ran a play, a quarterback sneak. The official took the ball from Namath, raised his hand, called it a touchdown. Another official came in and said, did he score? I couldn't tell if he scored with a big pileup. He said, yeah, he scored. I took the ball away from him in the end zone. While they were talking, another official came over and grabbed the ball away from him, put it down on the 6-inch line and motioned first down Texas, nullified the touchdown. Well, we were all dejected, and we started the sidelines, and Coach Bryant never moved. He stood there just like a statue on the sidelines. As we went by, somebody said, Coach, we scored. I'll never forget, he turned to us and he said, if he'd have walked in, there'd have been no question about it, would there? The very last play that I played at the University of Alabama, we didn't score. But he taught me a lesson for life. Because the lesson is, if you want to do something in life, don't do just enough to get the job done. Because the world's referees might not make the right call either.
Right.
Go beyond what's expected and leave no room for doubt. It was the greatest lesson that I learned, and it was on the last play, and it was as a result of a failed attempt. And I think sometimes the failed attempts teach us the best lessons.
That's a good point. As an adult, once you got to know him in other words, you were a non-player, you sort of became a confidant. What did you take away from him at that point?
Well, what I learned is that unlike a very uncharacteristic of Coach Bryant, he always had a plan for everything. As we have said, he did not have a transition plan. Mm-hmm. At the University of Alabama, when he decided to step down, his statement to us is, I'm going to give you all a list of about 10 or 12 names, and I don't want to be involved in it. He said, I'm not going to have anything else to do with the selection process. And he said, I don't want my former players or coaches to feel hard toward me. He did not have a transition plan in place. And because he didn't have a transition plan in place, I think the university suffered as a result of that. So, here I am at this stage in my life and still fortunately in great health, but I'm working on a transition plan because I know the day will come when I won't be able to operate anymore and I won't be able to run my institute in Gulf Shores anymore. Mm-hmm. So I'm already starting to work years in advance for that transition plan. That was the lesson that I learned from him afterwards.
Kind of thinking ahead. Well, I'd be remiss without asking you then, do you think what Florida State's doing with Bobby Bowden and Jimbo Fisher is a good idea?
No.
And why is that?
Well, because it hurts your recruiting. The indecision for an 18 to 19-year-old boy and their families, not knowing who's going to be the head coach. Also the players. Mm-hmm. If you don't know that Coach so-and-so is going to be your coach next year, it creates indecision and conflict within an organization. And I think you see that Florida State's suffering from that right now.
Yeah, interesting.
Their record is, and the way they're playing, mm-hmm. is an example of that. And I know what Coach Bowden wants to do, and he wants to win as many games as possible. But there comes a time, and Coach Bryant recognized this. There comes a time when you just have to step aside for the betterment of the organization.
Tell me what Paul Bear Bryant was like off the football field.
Well, I knew that part of the man very, very well, probably as well as anybody. He was a very sincere person. He loved to laugh. He actually loved to have fun, and I was among a very small group of people that would poke fun at him. Mm-hmm. And they'd get him laughing, and he'd just have the biggest old belly laughs. And he was a competitor in everything that he did. He was not a great golfer, but buddy, he'd beat your socks off out on the golf course. Not because he was better than you were, but because he'd outmaneuver you or whatever else. But he was a very sincere person. He wondered, he really worried toward the end if he lived the kind of life that would allow him to get into heaven. That was one of his greatest concerns. And, I think he did. Now, he was not a perfect man. Mm-hmm. I would be the first to tell you that. He had his flaws, as many great people do. But I think that if you weigh the positives and then you weigh the negatives over here, gee, the scales are tilted so much in favor of the positive. He did a lot of good for a lot of people. Things that never really came out, some of which I've talked about in here. He got a call one Christmas morning. One of his friends called and said, Coach, there's a child that's got leukemia in Children's Hospital that probably is not going to live the week out. And said her wish is that she wants to meet you. Well, he got in his car immediately on Christmas morning and drove to Birmingham and met that child and then turned around and went home. Nobody ever knew about those kinds of things. He did a lot of things for people that just because he was a good person. He recognized his position in the world. He knew that he was special. And he knew that people were watching very carefully. But
you mentioned in the book that he liked to make money.
Yeah.
Tell me, he was a pretty good businessman?
No. He was not a good businessman, but he had a lot of good businessmen advising him.
Okay.
He was terrible. He loved to wager on things too. He loved to bet on horse races. He loved horses, because he said you can look at a pedigree of a horse and you can generally tell how they're going to perform. And he felt the same way about players. Well, he got ready to recruit a player. He'd look at their family history, and if their family had been in trouble, he didn't want to fool with the player. But in terms of making money, I say in the book that I think he liked to make money about as well as he liked to win football games. And that's one of the reasons that we talked about earlier, that he decided to have his surgery, his facial surgery.
And you did that. You did.
Yes, that was one of the things I did for him, fortunately, before his health really, really turned badly. But his agent is the one that advised him. to do that. You know, he was getting close to breaking the record, and in those days, his agent, he was doing a lot of commercials. He did Ford and he did the AT&T one, the great commercial where he's sitting with his back and he turns around to the camera and he hangs up the phone and then he says, "Have you called your mama today? I sure wish I could call mine." Oh, great commercial.
Oh, yeah.
But his agent said, "Coach, listen, if we're going to be doing these advertisements and commercials, you got to get your neck done." And so that's the reason he did it, was because he wanted to make money.
That's a great story. We've got 3 minutes or so left here. What kind of coach would he be in today's environment? Would he be different than he was in those days?
He'd be different, but he'd still be a winner. That was one of the secrets to his success, is he was able to adapt. If you went back and looked at when he started, and then the coach that he was when he finished, he adapted to the situations. He would change when change was needed, but he would not change for the sake of change. When he put in the wishbone, Alabama had 2 6-5 seasons, and he knew he had to do something different. So he put in the wishbone, and then we win several national championships. No, he would be a successful coach today.
Nick Saban, your thoughts?
I think he's the next legend. He doesn't walk like Coach Bryant. He doesn't talk like him. He doesn't look like him. Doesn't necessarily coach like him. But I tell you, between his ears, I think there's the same type of talent. And I think he's going to be very successful. And one of the things I say in the book to my teammates, many of whom have been very reluctant to jump on the bandwagon and support any coach that's been up there behind Coach Bryant's desk since he left. It's time. It's time to get on the bandwagon and support Coach Saban, because he's the next legend. And while the reason I chose the name, The Long Shadow, we should never forget Coach Bryant. We should always remember who he was and the contributions that he made. But if he were alive today, he'd be leading the march behind the program up there right now, and behind every coach that ever coached there.
The book's got a lot of interesting inside information. I enjoyed reading through it. If somebody wants to get a copy of it, The Long Shadow of Coach Paul Bear Bryant, where would they go about getting a copy?
Well, it's in Books A Million, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and if you call my clinic over in Gulf Shores, I'll be delighted to see that a copy is sent to you.
Okay. Any plans to write anything else?
Oh, yes.
What you got?
Writing is my avocation now. I really have gotten on this bandwagon. I love to write. I'm writing a novel right now, and it's my first attempt at fiction. It's called The Oath, and it has to do, first of all, with the oath of Hippocrates, and then the character becomes a United States congressman, and through a very, very interesting set of circumstances becomes president of the United States.
Oh, interesting.
And it's about honor and betrayal, and it's very timely. A lot of things going on in Washington right now is what this book is about, and I'm having a good time with this one.
I bet you are. Well, that's wonderful. Dr. Gaylon McCollough, the name of the book that we've been talking about today is The Long Shadow of Coach Paul Bear Bryant. And you'll have to come back to see us when you get finished with that novel.
Be my pleasure, Jeff.
It's a real pleasure you joining us.
Thank you very,
Best
very
of luck
much.
to you.
Thank you.
You bet. And thank you so very much for watching this edition of Conversations. I'm Jeff Weeks, wishing you all the very best. Take good care of yourself. We'll see you soon.